Thank you, Richard. You did kind of steal my thunder a little bit, to be honest with you, but no. I know I'm standing in the way of lunch, so I want to just talk with you briefly today about the concept of asset protection. And, you know, for some people, it's something they're passionate about. Some people have never even really thought about it. I love coming to conferences like this because, you know, we have our own family office. We're in primarily financial services and real estate internationally. And I always pick up things that are valuable to us from what I would call an offense perspective, right? All the other speakers up here, they're all talking about offense. But in any game that you play, any sport that you get involved in, you know there's two sides of the equation, right? There's offense and there's defense. So I'm going to talk just a little bit about defense. That's what I've spent the last 34 years of my career doing. So the presentation today is Global Asset Protection for a Dangerous World. And this speech has changed a lot over 34 years, except one thing has not changed, the title, right? We always live in a dangerous world, and you always have to think about how to protect yourself. So that's one thing I've never changed, is the title of this presentation. And I've given this presentation over a 3-day seminar, a 1-day presentation to physician groups, 2 hours, 1 hour, 45 minutes. I have never done this in 15 minutes. So I'm going to do my best. But these are the points that I would just like to briefly touch on. And then if anybody would like to meet with me and talk about it more, we can follow up after the conference. By the way, my son Joe and James Burnett over here, just wave. They have my schedule. If anybody would like to speak with me one-on-one, please do that. So what is asset protection? Why do we do it? What risks are we protecting ourselves from? What are the benefits of international versus domestic planning? And what are the most common structures to achieve asset protection? Those are the 4 things that I just really want to touch on in a brief way. So what is asset protection? Protect what's yours, right? I mean, I have a brother who told me one time, hey, I don't need asset protection because I don't have any assets. And you know what? He's absolutely right. And most people, I read a statistic that only about 6% of Americans have a liquid net worth of $100,000 or more. 100,000, we're not talking millions, 10 millions, 100 millions, $100,000. Only 6% of Americans could sit down right now and write a check for 100,000. I guess that's everybody in this room. So, you know, you are the ones that have assets, and that means you're the ones that have to protect those assets. Now, for some people, asset protection can be super complicated. We get into multiple structures all over the world, trusts and foundations and, you know, bank accounts and limited partnerships and LLCs and IBCs and GmbHs, and it goes on and on and on. But for some people, it's just taking your 16-year-old daughter's credit card away from her, right? That's asset protection too. I happen to have the 16-year-old daughter, so I know what I'm talking about with this. All right, and when I talk about what asset protection is, I also want to mention what asset protection is not, and I think Richard touched on that. It's not a scheme to evade taxes. You know, people come to me all the time, and they're like, okay, well, you know, how's anybody going to know? Wink, wink, how do I get the magic fairy dust to make my taxes go away? No, that's not what asset protection is. Asset protection is you can go into a court, put your hand on the Bible, swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, talk about your assets. Here's the 709 gift tax return that we filed when we transferred this money to an offshore trust. Here it is. Here's the name of the trustee. Here's their phone number. If you have an issue, go contact them. But if this clicker represents my net worth and I transfer my net worth to somebody else, I can put my hand on the Bible and swear to tell the truth. And when they're asking me about my assets, I say, I don't have any. That's really the benefit of international asset protection planning. And I've gone to conferences where plaintiff lawyers have stood up and told me there's never been a structure that we haven't been able to pierce, particularly here in California, right? And I'm like, okay, well, you know, we do this in Liechtenstein, and this in Cook Islands, and this in Belize, and this in Panama, and this in Singapore. What of those countries have you ever pierced a corporate, an asset protection structure? And they look at me dumbfounded. They're like, well, we're not talking about offshore things. We're only talking about domestic things. And yes, the U.S. is a very pro-plaintiff system, and it is much easier to pierce structures in the U.S. That's why we jurisdiction shop, and we worked over the years in 43 countries around the world. So Richard did take this direct thing. It's not hide and seek. It really is show and tell. It's telling what you've done. It's legal, moral, ethical, and if people want to challenge it, they can. It's not impossible. I am happy that in 34 years, we've never had a client lose a penny because of lawsuits or claims, even government sanctions, anything. Nobody's ever lost the money that way. They may have lost money because they made a bad investment. I can't help you there because we're not the offense. We help you create the right structures and strategies so you can sleep well at night. And then it's up to all the other people in the room that you're attracted to talk to about what your offense should be, what those investments should be. So, Sun Tzu in the book, The Art of War, almost 3,000 years ago, which as an asset protection lawyer, I always love that book, but this one quote I just love. It says, "The prevention of defeat lies in our own hands. Hence, the skillful fighter puts himself in a position that makes defeat impossible." In other words, before he worries about winning the war, he wants to make sure that he can't lose the war. And that is exactly, my friends, what asset protection planning is. We make it so you can't lose the war, and then you talk to all the other people here about how you can win the war with the right kind of investments. So next, the second question was, what are the risks we're protecting ourselves from? And, again, we spend a lot of time going through these sections. Litigation risks, I think, are pretty clear. Everybody knows, the American pastime is not baseball, it's litigation, right? If you're not happy with what somebody's doing, if somebody's not happy with you, what do? They sue you. In the United States, every 17 seconds of every minute of every hour of the day, a new federal lawsuit is filed. When you add in state litigation, it drops to about 7 seconds, and that doesn't include divorce, which I tell people, if litigation is a war, then divorce is civil war, right? Because you're fighting each other from the same pot of money. So when you think in those terms, the constant amount of litigation going on, and we have a system that's very pro-plaintiff. So we use international asset protection planning to not only level that playing field, but to go the other way. We want to be in jurisdictions that are very pro-defense. So that's litigation risks. Economic risks, again, I'm not an investment advisor, but I think you're hearing a lot of great information at conferences like this. How do you keep up with inflation? And I listen to investment people all the time, and they're talking about stocks and bonds and mutual funds. And I say, well, what about global diversification? Because if, let's say, all my eggs are in the dollar basket, and the dollar, and I earn a 12% return. And I say, well, that sounds great, but what if the dollar goes down that year against a basket of currencies 15%? It sounds like you made money with 12%, but in reality, you lost 3%, and you got to pay a lot of tax for the privilege of losing 3%. That's when you're focused just on the domestic U.S. market, that's the risk you run. So economic risk, very important. A lot of our clients, they want to have some kind of diversification, whatever that is. It could be other currencies, can be gold. A lot of family offices use hard assets like gold and real estate, even Bitcoin, things like that, things that they know. I can't tell you tomorrow they're going to be worth more, but I can tell you in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, they're going to be worth more. Or they'll at least keep up with inflation. Physical risks, people don't like talking about physical risks, but physical risks determine where you live, where you work, where you go to school, which country even that you live in, right? Anybody want to live in Ukraine right now? No, right? The physical risks are too great. And that's where we get into talking to clients about second residency, second citizenships, having one more as an insurance policy. Maybe they stick their Dominica or their Austrian passport in their safety deposit box and hope they never need it. But if they need it, they have it. And that's what asset protection planning is all about, because at the end of the day, your biggest asset is yourself. Then we have taxation risks, and there's probably a lot of people, I really appreciated the panel earlier where they're talking about how you can leverage IRAs, Roth IRAs, insurance products. By the way, you can combine all of those concepts with the offshore world. A lot of people don't know that or realize that. You can create an offshore LLC owned by your domestic IRA custodian and move all that money offshore and have it outside the dollar, invested around the world wherever you want, and it's completely deferred, or in the case of Roth IRAs, exempt from taxation. So a lot of people, when they want to go and invest money offshore around the world, they like to do it in that kind of tax-deferred way. Okay, so why, the third question, international versus domestic. No recognition of U.S. judgments. Here in the U.S., under the full faith and credit clause of the U.S. Constitution, states have to recognize judgments from other states. So if you get a judgment against me in Texas or California, that judgment can follow me to Pennsylvania where I live. That's not the case in foreign countries. So foreign countries specifically, they don't recognize foreign judgments under their own litigation. That means you have to go into that country and bring the lawsuit. In many cases, you have something called a bright line test, which is what came first, the creation of the structure or the lawsuit? Very simple. If I create a trust for you, let's say in Belize today, and tomorrow somebody sues you and tries to go after those trust assets, they're just going to sit there and look at the dates. When was the litigation filed? When was the trust created? If the trust was created before the litigation was filed, they're not going to even entertain the litigation. If it was after, they might in certain circumstances. So there's a bright line test. Elimination of the statute of frauds, which basically is a several hundred-year-old English common law concept that basically talks about when you can sue people and when you can't. It's a little more technical than I have time to go into. And then bond requirements are jurisdictions that say, okay, if you want to sue me, go ahead, but you have to place a bond with the court equal to the amount you want to sue me for. And if I win, if I prevail, I get all of my costs, my legal fees, I get all of that back. All right, so we have jurisdictional benefits. I love that one slide because I am from Pittsburgh, and that's the old steel curtain. I don't think anybody would particularly like to be the that's Super Bowl IX, by the way, Minnesota Vikings. And then, as Robin said, I am an investor in his Vikings team. So he actually brought me a purple jersey with my name on the back, which I said I'll wear everywhere except in Pittsburgh. Then you have privacy benefits, where, what you do is really kept private and secret, right? If I create a trust somewhere in the Cook Islands, there's no public registry where somebody can go and see, oh, that's Joel Nagel who set that up. No, they just see there's XYZ trust. And it doesn't disclose how much assets are in it and, who the beneficiaries are. And a couple weeks ago, I was at the Miami Boat Show. Amazing, if you've never seen that. More wealth than you can really shake a stick at in one place. All of the boats are owned that way. They're all owned by Cayman companies, trusts here and there. Why? Because they don't particularly want to advertise who the ultimate owner is. Tax benefits for living outside the U.S. We have something called the foreign earned income exclusion. For a married couple, you can exempt about $250,000 in income and housing allowance. If you're from most of the other countries in the world and you move outside your home country, you don't pay any tax because most countries tax you based on residency. The U.S. taxes you based on citizenship. So the only way you're going to get out of a U.S. person from U.S. tax would be to actually expatriate, which I'm not advocating, but we do a lot of work in that space for people who come to that point and decide that they want to expatriate. And by the way, under U.S. law, the only way to legally expatriate is to first have a second citizenship. So that's why so many people every year get second citizenships. Very few take the last step to give up their U.S. citizenship, but they have the ability to if they want to or need to. And then estate benefits, we can create structures that go on for 1,000 years if they need to. So I'm just about out of time, but I want to throw this slide up here in conclusion. These are the most kind of common structures and strategies that we work with around the world. Trusts, both revocable and irrevocable. Foundations, which is the civil law version, more or less, of trusts. Corporations, insurance products. I'm not an insurance salesman, but I can tell you one of the most effective ways to move wealth generationally is through insurance. Why? Because insurance, the cash value grows tax deferred, and at the point where the benefit is actually paid, it comes out tax-free. So tax deferred, tax-free. The only challenge in all of that is for it to work, you have to die. So it's not a great strategy for some people, but when you're trying to move money generationally, it's a very good strategy. And then non-reportable foreign assets, there are people that want to know, what can I buy and hold offshore that I don't have to report to the U.S. government? We're talking real estate, we're talking precious metals. You know, there's still a handful of assets that you can legally hold abroad that you don't have to file a specific return for. And then foreign residency, we talked about getting residency, whether it's in, you know, a Caribbean island, in Austria, Portugal. You know, we help clients do that all over the world. And then debt. I just mentioned debt for one reason. Debt is not really a structure, but it is a strategy. Why? Because if you sue me, let's say I have a home in Pennsylvania and my home's worth $1 million, but I have $950,000 in debt on that home. Is it going to be very interesting for you to sue me to try to get my home? Not really, because who's going to be in front of you? The bank, right? So if Bank America holds my mortgage, you think you're going to jump in front of Bank America? No. So your lawyer, even if you have a good plaintiff's lawyer, they're going to say, don't bother going after the house. So that's it. I hope you, I really spoke quickly. I hope you were able to listen as quickly as I was speaking, but it was great to be here, and thank Richard for having me here. We're talking about doing an event together, a true offshore event this summer, and I'm sure he'll tell you more about that. So on that note, if anyone would like to talk to me personally, I'll be around all the rest of the day. Thank you for your attention, and have a good lunch.